Most people think religion collapses when science disproves it, but that's not true. Religion doesn't fall apart when facts attack it. It collapses when logic quietly asks the wrong question. Because the most dangerous threat to belief isn't evidence, it's consistency. Tonight, we're not going to mock religion. We're not going to debate scripture. We're not even going to talk about science versus faith. We're going to do something far more unsettling. We're going to follow logic, calmly, respectfully, and watch belief dismantle itself from the inside. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The illusion of unquestionable truth. Every religion begins the same way. Not with proof, not with testing, not with doubt. It begins with certainty. A quiet confidence that does not ask to be examined, only accepted. This is the truth. This was revealed. This cannot be questioned. The words feel solid, final, safe, and that feeling of safety is exactly what makes it powerful. Certainty feels like strength. It feels like standing on rock instead of shifting sand. But logic notices something most people miss. Real strength does not fear pressure. Real truth does not need insulation. If something is genuinely true, it can survive being looked at from every angle. It can handle questions. It can handle doubt. It can handle disagreement without falling apart. The moment a belief needs protection from questioning, something subtle happens. The focus shifts. It is no longer about discovering what is true. It becomes about defending what is already believed. And defense is not the language of confidence. It is the language of fear. Fear that if the walls come down, something inside will collapse. Ask yourself this slowly, without hostility. Why would an all-powerful truth need fragile human minds to guard it? Why would something eternal depend on silence, obedience, or social pressure to remain intact? Truth does not need guardians, it only needs light. Here is where it gets even more unsettling. Every believer recognizes this weakness in other religions. They see the certainty, the immunity to doubt, the refusal to question, and they call it blind faith. They notice it instantly. But somehow, when it comes to their own belief, the rules change. Their belief feels different, deeper, more justified, more reasonable, more obvious. It feels like the exception to the pattern, and that feeling is not accidental, it is psychological. The human mind is extraordinarily good at carving out special rules for ideas tied to identity, family, and meaning. This is the exact moment logic steps closer, quietly, patiently, not to attack, but to compare. And comparison is dangerous to unquestionable truth. Because once you see the pattern repeating everywhere except where you stand, the illusion begins to thin, and once that illusion cracks, it never fully seals again. The problem of exclusive truth. There are thousands of religions spread across the world. Different names, different symbols, different rituals, different gods. Yet, almost all of them share one striking claim. They alone possess the truth, not a version of it, not a perspective, the truth. And by definition, that means the others must be wrong. This is where logic pauses and asks a question that feels simple but cuts deeply. What makes your belief different from all the others, other than the place you were born? Not your sincerity, not your devotion, not how strongly it feels, just geography, a line on a map, a language spoken at home, a tradition passed down before you were old enough to question it. Think about a child born somewhere else. That child grows up, surrounded by different prayers, different stories, different sacred words. They are taught from the beginning what is true and what is false. They kneel, they pray, they feel awe, they feel fear, they feel certainty. Not a weaker certainty, not a borrowed one, the same kind you feel now. They are not lying to themselves. They are not confused. They are not acting. They are convinced. And that conviction feels just as real to them as yours does to you. So, logic asks something uncomfortable. If sincerity is evidence of truth, then every religion becomes true at the same time. But they contradict each other. They cancel each other out. And when everyone is right, no one actually is. At that moment, belief quietly changes shape. It stops being about what is true in an objective sense. It becomes about where you happen to be born, who raised you, and which stories reached you first. Truth shrinks into tradition. Conviction becomes inheritance. But logic is not satisfied yet. It does not stop at pointing out coincidence. It asks something colder, something more unsettling. If you had been born somewhere else, would you still believe this was the one true path? And if the answer is no, then the belief was never about truth to begin with. The circular reasoning trap. Ask a believer a simple question. How do you know this religion is true? The answer often comes quickly and with confidence. Because the book says so. It sounds reasonable at first. Calm, certain, familiar. So logic asks the next question. How do you know the book is true? The answer feels just as solid, because it was written by God. Now pause for a moment and notice what just happened. We moved from certainty to authority without actually adding evidence. Logic asks once more, gently, how do you know God wrote it? And the answer circles back to where it began. Because the book says so. That is the loop. It feels like an explanation, but it never actually leaves the claim. The belief points to itself, then uses that self-reference as proof. Logic has a name for this pattern: circular reasoning. It is when a conclusion is supported only by repeating itself in different words. From the inside, this feels convincing, comforting, even. Everything fits together neatly. Nothing is left unanswered. There is no tension, no uncertainty. And that emotional smoothness is exactly why it works. The mind prefers closed systems. They feel safe. But step outside the circle and something changes immediately. The structure collapses, because no matter how many times you walk around the loop, you never encounter independent support. You never touch the ground of reality. You are just orbiting the same claim again and again. Imagine applying this logic anywhere else. A book claims it is true because it says it is true. A person claims authority because they say they have authority. A story proves itself by quoting itself. We would reject it instantly. Without anger, without debate, we would simply recognize the flaw. Once you see this pattern clearly, it becomes impossible to ignore. You start hearing it in sermons, in debates, in casual conversations, the same loop dressed in different language, different emotions, different traditions. And belief senses the danger. Because if the loop is exposed, certainty weakens. So belief reaches for something stronger, something that does not rely on logic at all, something harder to challenge. And that is where the next defense appears, the invisible explanation. Watch how belief explains the world. When something good happens, it is called God's will, a promotion, a recovery, a lucky escape. Gratitude flows upward, meaning is assigned instantly. When something bad happens, the language shifts. It becomes God's plan, a test, a lesson, a path we are not meant to understand yet. When prayers are answered, it is labeled a miracle, proof of presence, proof of care. When prayers are not answered, the explanation changes again. Mystery, timing, a higher wisdom beyond human understanding. Pause and notice the pattern. Every possible outcome fits neatly inside the belief. Success confirms it. Failure confirms it. Relief confirms it. Suffering confirms it. There is no scenario where the belief is allowed to be wrong. Logic has a word for this kind of claim: unfalsifiable. It means a statement that is structured in such a way that nothing can ever count against it. No evidence can challenge it because every outcome is already absorbed and reinterpreted to support it. At first, this feels like strength. A belief that explains everything feels powerful, all-encompassing, complete. But logic sees the cost of that completeness. If nothing can count against a belief, then nothing truly counts for it either. Evidence loses its meaning when it has no alternative outcome. Confirmation becomes automatic. An automatic confirmation is not insight, it is insulation. An explanation that explains everything ends up explaining nothing. It stops making predictions, it stops taking risks, it stops interacting with reality in a way that could ever surprise it. At that point, belief is no longer a way of understanding the world. It becomes a lens that reshapes the world to protect itself. Reality is not allowed to speak freely. It must pass through interpretation first. And now, logic does something unsettling. It turns away from explanations and looks directly at values, not what is claimed to be true, but what is claimed to be good. And that question is far harder to escape. The moral paradox. At the center of religious belief sits a powerful claim: God is the source of morality. Good and evil flow from divine command. Right and wrong are not human inventions, but eternal truths handed down from above. It sounds stable, reassuring, absolute. Logic approaches this claim carefully and asks a single question: is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? The question feels abstract at first, but its consequences are devastating. If something is good because God commands it, then morality becomes arbitrary. Good is good only because it was declared so. That means anything could be justified. Cruelty could become virtue. Violence could become righteousness. All that would be required is command. In that world, morality has no anchor beyond power. But consider the other option. If God commands something because it is good, then goodness must exist independently of God. It must be something even God recognizes rather than creates. And in that case, morality does not come from God at all. God becomes a messenger, not a source. Either way, the foundation shifts. The absolute certainty begins to wobble. God is no longer the origin of moral truth. At best, God enforces morality. At worst, God defines it arbitrarily. Neither option gives morality the stability religion promises. Logic does not raise its voice here. It does not accuse. It does not ridicule. It simply waits. Because once the dilemma is seen clearly, there is no third option hiding in the shadows. There is no clever rewording that escapes it. And belief feels that pressure. You can sense it in the hesitation, in the sudden appeal to mystery, in the attempt to change the subject. This is not a problem of missing information. It is a problem of structure. Still, belief is resilient. It has one more refuge, one final place to retreat where logic feels least welcome, and that is where the argument moves next. The God of the gaps collapse. For most of human history, God explained the unknown. Lightning tearing the sky apart was divine anger. Disease moving silently through villages was punishment or testing. Earthquakes were warnings. The stars were messages written across the heavens. Wherever fear and confusion lived, God was placed there to give the chaos a face. Then, something changed. Humans started asking different questions, careful ones, repeatable ones, and slowly, the darkness began to shrink. Lightning became electricity, disease became biology. Earthquakes became shifting plates. The stars became burning spheres governed by gravity and time. God did not vanish, belief simply retreated. It moved inward, away from storms and sickness, toward safer ground, consciousness, meaning, purpose, the beginning of time, the places where answers were still incomplete. Logic notices this pattern immediately. Every time we say we do not know, God is placed in the gap. Not as an explanation, but as a placeholder, a temporary stand-in for uncertainty. And every time knowledge advances, the gap closes, quietly, without debate, without intention. God is not argued away, God is displaced. This is why belief keeps moving, from the sky to the soul, from nature to morality, from history to origins. Wherever the questions feel hardest, belief settles in and claims permanence. But logic asks something unsettling. If God only lives where knowledge has not yet arrived, what does that say about the foundation of belief? Is God the ultimate answer, or simply the name we give to unanswered questions? Think about it carefully. A belief that depends on ignorance is fragile by design. It survives only as long as we do not look too closely. It hopes for mystery to remain forever. And now belief rests on a single hope: that there will always be one final question science cannot touch, one last darkness no light can reach. Logic does not rush to remove that hope. It simply asks, calmly and without malice, what happens if one day there is not? What happens when the gaps finally close? Not with hostility, but with understanding. Because if God was never defeated, only replaced, then belief was never standing on solid ground to begin with. And once that realization settles in, the structure begins to feel far less eternal than it once did. The emotional core of belief. Here is the truth most debates never reach. Religion does not survive because it makes the most sense. It survives because it meets emotional needs that logic alone does not satisfy. This is not an insult. It is an observation about being human. Belief offers comfort in a chaotic world. It tells you that suffering has meaning, that pain is not random, that someone is watching. It offers purpose by placing your life inside a larger story, one where your actions matter beyond this moment, one where nothing is truly wasted. It offers belonging, a shared language, shared rituals, shared answers. You are not alone in your fear or confusion. You are part of something older and larger than yourself. And perhaps most powerfully, it offers relief from death anxiety, the promise that the story does not end when the body does. These are not small things, they are profound psychological stabilizers. And that is why belief persists even when logic applies pressure. Not because the arguments are strong, but because the emotional reward is. Logic does not try to steal these comforts. It does not mock them or deny their value. What logic does is expose the trade that is being made, certainty in exchange for truth, emotional security in exchange for intellectual honesty. Once you see that trade clearly, something shifts. Belief stops feeling sacred and untouchable. It starts feeling human, crafted to soothe fear, designed to calm uncertainty, shaped by needs rather than evidence. And in that realization, there is no hatred, no superiority, only clarity. You can understand why belief exists without needing to submit to it. You can appreciate its beauty without confusing it for truth. Religion becomes a mirror of the human mind rather than a window into the universe. It reveals our longing for meaning, our fear of oblivion, our desire to matter. And that insight leads to the final realization. When belief is understood psychologically rather than mystically, its authority dissolves, not with violence or anger, but with understanding. And in that quiet understanding, something far more honest takes its place. Logic doesn't destroy religion with hostility. It dissolves it with calm. Not by shouting, but by asking. Not by attacking faith, but by removing its immunity. And when belief collapses under logic, what's left isn't emptiness. It's freedom. Freedom to wonder without answers, to live morally without fear, to face reality without mythology. Religion doesn't fall when people stop believing. It falls when people start thinking consistently. So, if this made you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is curiosity waking up. And if you value truth over comfort, clarity over certainty, then stay curious, keep questioning, and subscribe, because belief systems collapse quietly here.